My name is Naomi. I'm 26 years old. And I'm about to tell you about the night that split my life into before and after, the night I learned that sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones who spill it most carelessly. The music was too loud. The laughter was too sharp. 100 people crammed into that suffocating reception hall, all of them family, all of them watching as my sister Jennifer pointed her manicured fingers straight at my chest and delivered the words that would echo in my skull for months. You're worthless. Even your own family doesn't want you. The room erupted. Not with gasps of shock or murmurs of disapproval, no, they erupted with laughter. Genuine, belly-deep laughter that bounced off the cheap wood paneling and crashed over me like a wave. My cousin Mark slapped his knee. Aunt Susan covered her mouth, but her shoulders shook with mirth. Even my own mother, my own goddamn mother, had this twisted smile playing at the corners of her mouth like she was watching some comedy special instead of her daughter being publicly eviscerated. I stood there in my thrift store dress, the one I'd spent 3 hours picking out because I wanted so desperately to fit in, to belong, to be worthy of their acceptance for just one night. The sequins felt scratchy against my skin now, cheap and obvious under those fluorescent lights that made everyone look sickly yellow except somehow they all still looked better than me. Jennifer's eyes were bright with victory. She'd been building to this moment all evening, I could see it now, looking back. The way she'd positioned herself near the microphone during the toasts. The way she'd gathered an audience with her perfectly practiced expressions of concern. Poor Naomi, she'd been saying all night. Always struggling. Always behind. Always needing help. But this wasn't help. This was execution. The tears came before I could stop them. Hot and shameful, sliding down my cheeks while 100 people watched and laughed and pointed. Someone in the back yelled, "Speech! Speech!" And the laughter got louder, meaner, more cutting. My face burned with humiliation, so intense I thought I might actually burst into flames right there on the spot. Before we go any further, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in the UK, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in Australia, I want to know. Don't just sit back and watch this like it's entertainment. Tell me where in the world you are, because what happened to me that night could happen to anyone, anywhere, at any time. This isn't just my story. This is a warning. I turned and walked out of that hall while they were still laughing. The heavy doors slammed behind me, but I could still hear it, that awful sound of people finding joy in my pain. The music kept playing, some upbeat pop song that felt like mockery now, and I stumbled outside into the parking lot where the October air hit my face like a slap. The smell of catered food drifted out every time someone opened the doors, expensive food I hadn't been able to afford to eat much of, served at a party celebrating Jennifer's promotion to regional manager. Jennifer, who was 2 years younger than me, but somehow light years ahead in every way that mattered to our family. Jennifer, who owned her own condo while I bounced between friends' couches. Jennifer, who wore designer clothes while I shopped clearance racks. Jennifer, who had just publicly declared me worthless to thunderous applause. I sat on the concrete steps outside that hall for 3 hours. 3 hours while the party continued without me, while they probably told jokes about where I'd gone, while they probably forgot I existed altogether. Cars came and went. People walked past me without a glance. The temperature dropped and I shivered in my thin dress, but I couldn't bring myself to leave, because leaving meant accepting what had just happened. The whispers started reaching me around 10 o'clock, when people began stepping outside for cigarette breaks and phone calls. They thought they were being subtle, but their voices carried in the cold air. She's always been a burden. Mom's been supporting her for years. What did she expect? She brings nothing to the table. Jennifer was just saying what everyone was thinking. Each word was a knife twist. Each dismissive laugh was another layer of shame piled onto my shoulders. These weren't strangers. These were people who'd held me as a baby, who'd come to my birthday parties, who'd sat at Christmas dinner and smiled at me while passing the mashed potatoes. But here they were, casually discussing my worthlessness like they were talking about the weather. I finally left when the parking lot was half empty and the October wind was cutting through my dress like it wasn't there at all. I called my friend Sarah, woke her up, begged her to let me crash on her couch again. She said yes because Sarah was good people, but I could hear the strain in her voice. I'd been wearing out my welcome everywhere I went, bouncing from couch to couch for 6 months since I'd lost my apartment. That night I lay on Sarah's scratchy plaid sofa staring at the ceiling and listening to her upstairs neighbors fight about money. The thin blanket she'd given me smelled like fabric softener and other people's lives that had structure and stability and families that didn't publicly humiliate them for sport. I replayed every second of what had happened, dissecting each laugh, each smirk, each moment of betrayal. The worst part wasn't even the words Jennifer had said. The worst part was how easily they'd all joined in. How quickly my family had abandoned any pretense of love or loyalty when given permission to express what they really thought of me. Like they'd been waiting years for someone to say it out loud so they could finally stop pretending to care. I'd always been the odd one out. The one who struggled in school while Jennifer glided through with honor roll grades. The one who worked retail jobs while Jennifer climbed corporate ladders. The one who rented rooms while Jennifer bought property. But I'd thought, God, how naive I was, I'd thought that blood meant something. I'd thought that being family meant they'd choose me even when I wasn't the shining star. If you've ever felt excluded by your own family, hit subscribe right now. And if you still won't, at least comment why, because I need to understand how you can hear this and just scroll away. How you can witness someone's pain and not feel compelled to acknowledge it, to say you see them, to prove that not everyone in the world is capable of the casual cruelty I experienced that night. The next few days blurred together in a haze of shame and self-doubt. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep properly. I kept replaying the scene, wondering what I could have said differently, what I could have done to change the outcome. Maybe if I'd been more successful. Maybe if I'd dressed better. Maybe if I'd just stayed home like the worthless person they clearly thought I was. Sarah tried to be supportive, but I could see the worry in her eyes every time she looked at me. I was spiraling, and we both knew it. She'd catch me staring at nothing, lost in the endless loop of that laughter echoing in my head. She'd try to engage me in conversation, and I'd give her hollow responses, because how do you explain that your entire sense of self has been shattered by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally? My phone stayed silent. Not one person from that party called to check on me. Not one person sent a text asking if I was okay. Not one person seemed to care that I disappeared from their celebration in tears. The silence was almost worse than the laughter because it confirmed what Jennifer had said. I really was worthless to them. So worthless that my public humiliation and subsequent disappearance didn't even register as noteworthy. I started questioning everything about myself. Was I really as worthless as they said? Had I been deluding myself into thinking I mattered? Was Jennifer right to call me out in front of everyone? Maybe I was just a burden. Maybe they'd all be better off if I disappeared entirely. 3 days after the party, I was sitting on Sarah's couch in my pajamas at 2 in the afternoon, staring at daytime television and wondering if this was what rock bottom felt like when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer because who calls anymore except scammers and debt collectors, and I wasn't in the mood for either. But something made me pick up on the 4th ring. Is this Naomi Patterson? The voice was professional, formal, unfamiliar. A man's voice with a slight accent I couldn't place. Yes, I said, my voice cracking from disuse. I'd barely spoken in 3 days. Miss Patterson, my name is David Hernandez. I'm an attorney with Hernandez and Associates. I'm calling about your grandmother's estate. I sat up straighter. My grandmother? She died 4 years ago. Yes, ma'am. Margaret Patterson. I apologize for the delay in contacting you, but there have been some complications with the estate that we've finally resolved. I need to schedule a meeting with you to discuss your inheritance. My inheritance? I almost laughed. Almost. Because what could my grandmother have possibly left me? The woman had lived in a tiny apartment, survived on Social Security, and wore the same 3 cardigans in rotation for the last decade of her life. We'd all assumed she died with nothing but medical debt and moth-eaten furniture. "I think there might be a mistake," I said. "My family would have told me if there was an inheritance." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, "Ms. Patterson, I think it would be better if we discuss this in person. Are you available to come to my office tomorrow afternoon?" Something in his tone made my skin prickle with anticipation. Not hope. I'd used up all my hope 3 days ago in that party hall. But anticipation, like waiting for the other shoe to drop in a life that had already dropped so many shoes I could open a damn shoe store. "I'll be there," I said. The law office was in a part of town I rarely visited, all gleaming glass buildings and expensive coffee shops. David Hernandez was a small man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and his office smelled like leather and old books. He gestured for me to sit in a chair across from his mahogany desk that probably cost more than I'd made all year. "Miss Patterson," he began, opening a thick file folder. "Your grandmother was a very careful woman, very private about her affairs." I nodded, not sure where this was going. When she passed 4 years ago, the majority of her estate went through the usual probate process. Your family received what they expected, her personal belongings, her small savings account, things of that nature. "Right," I said. There wasn't much. His smile was enigmatic. "That's what everyone thought. But your grandmother had been planning for years. She had investments, property holdings, business interests that she kept very quiet about. She was far wealthier than anyone in your family realized." The room seemed to tilt sideways. "That's impossible." "I assure you it's not. Your grandmother was quite shrewd with money. She lived modestly by choice, not by necessity." He pulled out a document and slid it across the desk. "This is her will. The real one. She left specific instructions that it was not to be executed until 4 years after her death, and only if certain conditions were met." I stared at the papers, but the words swam in front of my eyes. "What kind of conditions?" "She wanted to see how the family treated you after she was gone. She was very concerned about your welfare, and she suspected that without her influence, you might be marginalized or mistreated by your relatives." My throat felt tight. Grandma Margaret had always been kind to me, but I'd never realized she was watching so carefully. How could she know? She hired a private investigator to monitor the family dynamics for the past 4 years. She received regular reports about family gatherings, holiday celebrations, important events. He paused. "Including last weekend's party." The blood drained from my face. Someone was watching that? Your grandmother's instructions were very specific. If at any point during those 4 years you were publicly humiliated or rejected by the family in a significant way, her alternate will would be triggered. He leaned forward. "Ms. Patterson, you've just inherited a 40% stake in Patterson Properties, a real estate development company your grandmother founded 30 years ago under a corporate name. The same company that currently employs your sister Jennifer as regional manager." The world stopped spinning. 40%, I repeated numbly. "Which makes you the largest single shareholder. The rest is split between various family members, but none of them own more than 15% individually." He smiled. "Congratulations, Ms. Patterson. You're now your sister's boss." I walked out of that law office in a daze. 40%. The largest shareholder. Jennifer's boss. The woman who'd called me worthless in front of 100 people was now answering to me. The irony was so sharp I could taste it. I sat in my car in the parking garage for an hour, just breathing. For years. Grandma had been planning this for 4 years, watching from beyond the grave as her family showed their true colors. She'd known they would eventually reveal themselves, and she'd been right. My phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. "Hey, haven't heard from you since the party. Hope you're doing well. Family dinner this Sunday." I stared at the message. 3 days of silence, and now suddenly she was reaching out? Did she know? Had someone told her about the inheritance already? I deleted the message without responding. That night on Sarah's couch, I couldn't sleep. Not because of shame this time, but because of something else entirely. Something that felt dangerous and powerful and completely unfamiliar. For the first time in my life, I held cards that mattered. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one begging for scraps of acceptance. My phone started ringing the next morning and didn't stop. Jennifer called 6 times. My mother called twice. Even Mark, my cousin who'd slapped his knee while laughing at my humiliation, sent a text asking how I was doing. I didn't answer any of them. By the second day, the messages changed tone. Jennifer's texts went from casual concern to barely concealed panic. Naomi, please call me back. We need to talk. There's been some kind of legal issue with Grandma's estate, and I think there might be a mistake. A mistake. That's what she thought this was. A mistake that needed to be corrected so the natural order could be restored, with her on top and me on the bottom where I belonged. I let them sweat for a week. David Hernandez called me daily with updates. Your sister has contacted our office 7 times. He'd report with obvious amusement. She's demanding to know what's happening. What are you telling her? That all communication regarding the estate must go through you as the primary beneficiary. Tell me in the comments, would you answer their calls or would you let them sweat? Be honest. Because I want to know if you think I was being cruel or if you think they deserved every second of uncertainty I was putting them through. The truth is, I was learning something about power that I'd never understood before. Real power isn't about being the loudest voice in the room or the person who can deliver the most cutting insults. Real power is about being the person everyone else needs something from. Real power is about being able to say no and mean it. For 26 years, I'd been begging for their acceptance, their approval, their love. I'd bent myself into impossible shapes trying to earn a place at their table. I'd swallowed insults and endured humiliations because I thought that's what family meant, that you took whatever they gave you and were grateful for it. But now they needed me. Now they were the ones sending desperate messages and making frantic phone calls. Now they were the ones wondering what I was thinking, what I was planning, what I was going to do next. The reversal was intoxicating. On Friday, exactly 1 week after the party that changed everything, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message with a smile that felt foreign on my face. Naomi, honey, I don't know what's going on, but there seems to be some confusion about your grandmother's will. Jennifer is very upset, and the lawyers won't tell us anything. Please call me back so we can sort this out as a family. As a family. Now we were a family. When they needed something from me, suddenly I was family again. I saved the voicemail. Not because I wanted to treasure the moment, but because I wanted to remember how quickly their tune changed when the balance of power shifted. I wanted to remember how easily they could pivot from public humiliation to desperate pleading when their financial interests were threatened. David had advised me well, sometimes silence is the loudest answer you can give. And he was right. My silence was deafening them. Every day I didn't respond was another day they had to sit with the uncertainty, another day they had to wonder if their comfortable lives were about to be upended by the worthless family member they'd laughed at just a week ago. But I wasn't planning to stay silent forever. I was planning something much more satisfying than that. I was planning a reunion. The invitation came through my mother, delivered with the kind of formal politeness that reeked of desperation. We'd like to invite you to a family dinner this Saturday evening to discuss some important family matters. We hope you can join us. Important family matters. Not, we miss you, or we're sorry, or we want to make things right. Important family matters. Because that's all I was to them now, a matter to be handled, a problem to be solved, an inconvenience to be managed. I accepted the invitation. Saturday evening arrived gray and cold, with the kind of October wind that cuts through your clothes and makes you want to hurry inside to warmth and light. But I took my time walking up to my mother's house, the same house where I'd spent countless holiday dinners sitting at the kids' table even as an adult, where I'd been made to feel grateful for every scrap of attention or affection they threw my way. Tonight was different. Tonight, I wore a black dress I'd bought with money from my grandmother's estate, real money, the kind that didn't require checking account balances or calculating grocery budgets. It fit perfectly, flattered my figure, made me look like someone who belonged in boardrooms and corner offices. I'd had my hair professionally styled and my nails done. I looked, for the first time in my life, like I had worth. The dining room was set formally with the good china, the silver candlesticks, the crystal glasses that only came out for special occasions. They'd pulled out all the stops, these people who'd laughed at me just 8 days ago. The table was elegant, sophisticated, expensive, everything they'd always been, and I'd never been allowed to be. Jennifer was already seated when I arrived, wearing a navy blue blazer that screamed professional and serious. Her makeup was perfect, but I could see the strain around her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. She looked like someone who hadn't been sleeping well. Good. My mother fluttered around the table like a nervous bird, adjusting napkins and checking wine glasses. Mark sat quietly in the corner, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by something that looked almost like fear. Even Aunt Susan was there, though she could barely meet my eyes. All the players from that night were assembled, except now the stage was set differently. Now they were the supplicants, and I was the one with power. "Naomi," my mother said as I took my seat at the head of the table, the seat that had always belonged to my father before he died, the seat that had been Jennifer's ever since. "Thank you for coming. You look lovely. Lovely." The same woman who'd smiled while her daughter called me worthless now thought I looked lovely. "Thank you for inviting me," I said, my voice calm and level. I'd been practicing this tone for days, not cold, not angry, just professionally polite. The tone you'd use with business associates you didn't particularly like, but had to work with. Jennifer cleared her throat. "Naomi, we need to talk about what's happening with Grandma's estate. There seems to be some kind of legal issue." "Legal issue?" I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of legal issue?" "Well, apparently there's some question about ownership of Patterson properties. The lawyers are saying you have some kind of claim, but that can't be right because Grandma never mentioned anything about being wealthy?" I interrupted. "About owning a successful real estate development company? About watching her family for 4 years to see how they'd treat her least favorite granddaughter after she was gone." The silence that followed was electric. Jennifer's face had gone pale. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that our grandmother was a very smart woman who saw exactly what kind of people you all really are." I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the way they all seemed to shrink before my eyes. "I'm talking about the fact that she left me 40% of Patterson Properties, the company that employs you, Jennifer. The company that pays your salary, funds your lifestyle, makes you feel so superior to everyone else." "That's impossible," Jennifer whispered. "Is it? Is it impossible that the woman you all dismissed as a poor old lady living on Social Security was actually playing a much longer game than any of you were smart enough to recognize?" I smiled. "She hired a private investigator, you know, to watch family gatherings, to document how you treated me." Mark found his voice first. "Naomi, come on. We're family. Whatever happened at the party?" "What happened at the party," I said, my voice sharp as broken glass, "was that Jennifer stood in front of 100 people and told them I was worthless. And all of you laughed. All of you applauded. All of you showed your true colors so beautifully that even from beyond the grave, Grandma knew exactly what to do with her money." Jennifer tried to recover, tried to fall back on the charm that had always worked for her before. "It was just a joke. You know we love you. Family is family, right? We can work through this together." And there it was. The moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when she'd try to rewrite history, to gasoline light me into believing that my pain didn't matter, that their cruelty was just harmless fun. I stood up slowly, savoring the way their eyes followed me, the way they hung on my every movement like their futures depended on it. Because they did. "You laughed while I cried," I said, my voice carrying across the dining room like a judgment. "That's not love, it's control. You're not upset because you miss me or because you realize you hurt me. You're upset because you need what I now own. Jennifer's mask finally slipped. The desperation she'd been hiding behind false concern and fake smiles came pouring out. Naomi, please. Be reasonable. You don't know anything about running a business. You don't have any experience with what? With being successful? With being valuable? With being worthy of respect. I laughed, and it was a sound I'd never heard from myself before, confident, powerful, genuinely amused. You're right. I don't have experience with those things. Because every time I tried to build something, every time I reached for more, you all were right there to remind me of my place. I moved toward the door, but I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Here's what's going to happen, I said, turning back to face them. I own 40% of Patterson Properties. You, Jennifer, work for Patterson Properties. Which means you work for me now. And I have some thoughts about the direction we should take the company. Her face had gone from pale to green. Naomi, you can't be serious. Oh, I'm deadly serious. See, I've been thinking about something you said. About how I'm worthless. About how my own family doesn't want me. I smiled, and I could see my reflection in the china cabinet behind her, strong, composed, absolutely in control. You were right about one thing. My family didn't want me. But here's what you didn't understand. I don't need people who laugh at my pain. I don't need people who find joy in my humiliation. I don't need family who treat love like a privilege I have to earn instead of a right I was born with. I walked to the door, then paused with my hand on the handle. You called me worthless. But I've learned something this week. Your worth doesn't come from people who laugh when you cry. It comes from what you do when you finally realize you deserve better. I left them sitting in that dining room with their expensive china and their shock and their suddenly uncertain futures. I left them to sit with the consequences of their choices, to face the reality that their cruelty had cost them more than they ever imagined possible. The next few weeks were a masterclass in watching karma work its magic. Patterson Properties had been coasting on reputation and established client relationships for years, but it turned out those relationships were more fragile than anyone realized. Word travels fast in business circles, especially when it's delicious gossip about family drama and corporate shakeups. The story of the worthless granddaughter who inherited control of the company that had been dismissing her became the kind of tale that gets repeated over martinis at country club dinners. Jennifer's professional network, built so carefully over years of networking events and corporate lunches, began to crumble. People started questioning her judgment, her character, her ability to lead effectively. How could someone so cruel to her own family be trusted with million-dollar deals and client relationships? The first major client to pull out was the Morrison Development Group, a luxury housing project that represented 30% of Patterson Properties' annual revenue. Their CEO, Margaret Morrison, yes, a woman named Margaret, which felt like cosmic justice, sent a brief email explaining that they would be taking their business elsewhere due to concerns about corporate culture and family values. Margaret Morrison had apparently been at that party 8 weeks ago. She'd seen Jennifer's performance, watched the family laugh at my humiliation, and she'd been waiting to see how it would all play out. When the news of my inheritance broke, she'd made her decision. Other clients followed. Not all of them, but enough to send the company into a financial tailspin that had Jennifer working 18-hour days, trying to salvage deals and maintain relationships. The regional manager position she'd been so proud of became a nightmare of crisis management and damage control. Meanwhile, Mark lost his job at the marketing firm where he worked. Apparently, his boss had heard about the family dinner incident through the professional grapevine and decided that someone who would publicly humiliate a family member couldn't be trusted to represent their company with clients. Mark's lease was up for renewal, and without steady income, he had to move back in with his parents at age 32. Aunt Susan's book club, her pride and joy, the social circle that had defined her identity for 15 years, quietly asked her to step down from her leadership role. Too much drama, they said. Too much negative attention. The The story had spread beyond business circles into social ones, and suddenly being associated with the woman who'd laughed at her niece's public humiliation wasn't good for anyone's reputation. But Jennifer's collapse was the most spectacular to witness. She'd built her entire identity around being the successful one, the important one, the family member who mattered. She'd used her position at Patterson Properties to lord over the rest of us, to prove her worth and superiority. Now that same position was quicksand beneath her feet. I started receiving photos from mutual acquaintances, Jennifer crying in her car after losing another client, Jennifer drinking alone at bars where she used to network, Jennifer looking haggard and desperate at industry events where people whispered and pointed as she walked by. The woman who'd once been loud and commanding, who'd filled rooms with her confident laughter and cutting observations, had become small. Smaller than I'd ever been, even on my worst days sleeping on friends' couches and questioning my worth. She tried to reach out to me multiple times through intermediaries. David Hernandez's office received daily calls from her lawyer asking for meetings, negotiations, compromises. She wanted to discuss a reasonable transition of power and mutually beneficial arrangements. I declined every request. The beauty of having real power, I discovered, was that you didn't have to use it like a weapon. You could simply withhold it and watch people destroy themselves trying to guess what you might do with it. Jennifer was drowning in her own uncertainty, suffocating on the silence I'd wrapped around myself like armor. 3 months after that family dinner, I received a call from David with news that made me actually laugh out loud. The board has voted to remove Jennifer from her position as regional manager, he reported with obvious satisfaction. Effective immediately. They're citing declining performance and loss of client confidence. What's she going to do? Well, that's the interesting part. She's applied for unemployment benefits, but her financial situation appears to be quite dire. Apparently, she'd been living well beyond her means, assuming her position was secure. She's facing foreclosure on her condo. The same condo she'd used to prove her superiority over me. The same symbol of her success that had made me feel so inadequate for so many years. There's more, David continued. She's requested a meeting with you. Not through lawyers this time. She wants to speak with you directly. I considered this. For months, I'd been content to watch from a distance as the consequences of her actions played out. I'd been satisfied with the poetic justice of it all, the way the universe had rearranged itself to reflect the truth about who had value and who didn't. But there was something appealing about the idea of seeing her face to face now that our positions were completely reversed. Something satisfying about the thought of Jennifer having to look me in the eye and acknowledge what we both knew, that she'd been wrong about everything. Set it up, I said. The meeting took place in David's office on a Tuesday afternoon in January. Snow was falling outside the windows, and the conference room felt formal and cold. I arrived early and chose my seat deliberately, the chair at the head of the table, the position of power. Jennifer arrived 10 minutes late, which wasn't like her. The Jennifer I'd known my whole life was militantly punctual, one of those people who showed up 15 minutes early to everything and judged others for being even slightly behind schedule. But this Jennifer was different. This Jennifer looked tired, older, smaller somehow. She wore a black pantsuit that was obviously expensive but hung loose on her frame, like she'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. Her hair was still perfectly styled, but there was something desperate about it, like she was clinging to the external markers of success even as everything else fell apart. She sat across from me, and for a long moment we just looked at each other. Two sisters who'd never really been sisters, who'd spent 26 years circling each other like adversaries, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Thank you for seeing me," she said finally. Her voice was smaller than I remembered, missing the commanding tone that had once made rooms go quiet when she spoke. "You're welcome." Another silence. I could see her struggling with how to begin, how to navigate this conversation with someone she'd spent years treating as inferior, who now held her future in her hands. "I want to apologize," she said eventually. For what I said at the party. For how I treated you. It was wrong. I nodded, but said nothing. I'd learned the power of silence, and I wasn't about to give it up now. I know you have no reason to help me, she continued, but I'm hoping we can find a way to work together. Families should stick together, especially now. There it was again. Family. The magic word they all thought would fix everything, would erase years of casual cruelty and deliberate humiliation. You know what's interesting? I said finally. For months ago, you stood in front of 100 people and told them I was worthless. You said my own family didn't want me. And everyone laughed. She flinched. I know. I was angry, I was drunk, I wasn't thinking. No, I interrupted. You were thinking perfectly clearly. You'd been thinking those thoughts for years. You just finally said them out loud. That's not true. Isn't it? I leaned forward, studying her face. Tell me, Jennifer. In all the years we've been sisters, can you think of a single time you defended me? A single time you stood up for me? A single time you chose me over your own convenience or social standing? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I thought so, I said softly. See, the problem isn't what you said at that party. The problem is that it was true from your perspective. I was worthless to you. I was a burden. I was someone you had to tolerate rather than someone you chose to love. Tears started forming in her eyes, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But here's what you never understood, I continued. Worth isn't something other people give you. It's something you claim for yourself. And I spent so many years begging for scraps of approval from people who were never going to think I was enough. Naomi, please. You want to know what I'm going to do with my 40% of Patterson properties? I stood up, smoothing my skirt, taking my time. I'm going to sell it. Her face went white. You can't. The company will collapse. There are people who depend on those jobs. I can do whatever I want with my inheritance. That's what ownership means. I gathered my purse, my coat, my sense of satisfaction. But don't worry. I'm selling to someone who actually knows how to run a business. Someone who values competence over cruelty. Someone who understands that success isn't about tearing other people down to build yourself up. I headed for the door, then paused. You called me worthless, I said without turning around. But you're the one who threw away a sister for the temporary pleasure of a few laughs. You're the one who chose cruelty over kindness. You're the one who proved that when it mattered, when it counted, when I needed you most, you had nothing to offer but pain. I left her sitting in that conference room with her tears and her regrets and her suddenly uncertain future. I left her to figure out how to rebuild a life that she'd constructed on a foundation of other people's diminished worth. The sale of my shares went through 6 weeks later. I sold them to Margaret Morrison, the woman who'd pulled her company's business from Patterson Properties after witnessing Jennifer's cruelty. Margaret had vision, resources, and most importantly, values that aligned with treating people with dignity regardless of their circumstances. The first thing she did was restructure the company. She brought in new management, established policies about workplace respect and family leave, and created a corporate culture that valued collaboration over competition. She kept most of the existing employees, but made it clear that the old boys network approach to business was over. Jennifer wasn't invited to stay. 6 months after our confrontation in David's office, I ran into her at a coffee shop downtown. She was behind the counter, wearing a green apron, asking customers if they wanted to add a pastry to their order. She looked up when I approached, and for a moment, our eyes met across the gulf that had opened between our lives. Coffee, she asked, her voice professional but hollow. Large cappuccino, please. She made my drink with the kind of careful attention that comes from needing the job, from knowing that every customer interaction matters when you're earning minimum wage plus tips. When she handed me the cup, our fingers brushed briefly. I heard about the sale, she said quietly. Margaret Morrison seems like good people. She is. I also heard you used the money to start a foundation for young people aging out of foster care. I nodded. Seemed like the right thing to do. Another silence. The coffee shop was busy around us, full of people with their own stories, their own struggles, their own families that either lifted them up or let them down. I think about that night a lot, Jennifer said finally. The party. What I said. I'm sure you do. If I could take it back. But you can't, I said gently. And that's the thing about words, isn't it? Once they're out there, once they've done their damage, once they've shown people who you really are, you can't unsay them. I picked up my coffee and headed for the door, then turned back one last time. For what it's worth, I said, I don't think you're worthless. I think you're someone who made terrible choices and now you're living with the consequences. But that's not the same thing as being worthless. That's just being human. I left her there with her green apron and her minimum wage job and her chance to figure out who she wanted to be now that the old version of herself had been stripped away. As I walked down the street, sipping my cappuccino and feeling the spring sunshine on my face, I thought about worth, real worth, not the kind that comes from other people's approval or professional titles or expensive condos. I thought about my grandmother, who'd lived modestly but died knowing she'd used her wealth to teach a lesson about justice and dignity. I thought about the foster kids who would benefit from the foundation I'd started, kids who'd been discarded by families who should have protected them. I thought about the choice everyone faces between kindness and cruelty, between building people up and tearing them down. They'd called me worthless. But standing there in the sunshine, financially independent and emotionally free, surrounded by possibility instead of limitation, I felt anything but worthless. I felt like someone who'd learned the difference between having value and demanding respect. I felt like someone who'd discovered that the people who truly matter are the ones who see your worth even when you can't see it yourself, and the people who mock your pain are the ones you don't need permission to leave behind. I felt like someone who'd finally come home to herself. What would you have done in my place? Drop your thoughts below. I'll be reading every single one. Tell me if you think I was too harsh, or if you think justice finally found its way to the people who deserved it. Tell me about the times your own family let you down, or the moments when you realized you were worth more than the treatment you were accepting. And if you've watched this entire story and still won't subscribe, I have to ask, why? Why walk away from a community that values truth, justice, and the radical idea that everyone deserves to be treated with basic human dignity? What is it about stories of people claiming their worth that makes you want to scroll past instead of standing up and saying, yes, I see you, your pain matters, your triumph matters, your voice deserves to be heard? Because here's what I learned from everything that happened. The people who laugh at your lowest moments were never your people to begin with. The people who mock your pain are telling you everything you need to know about their character. And the people who stand with you when the whole room is against you, those are the people worth building a life around. Your worth doesn't come from people who treat love like a favor they're doing you. It comes from the courage to demand better and the strength to walk away when better isn't what they're offering. It comes from knowing that sometimes the best family is the one you choose for yourself.